Does anything really matter? It's interesting how sometimes we work really hard to try to achieve a result, and then when you look back at what happened, you realize that it wasn't your effort that led you to where you wound up. It was something more providential, something which just happened that was pretty much outside the realm of something you really put a lot of energy into, right? It's like, for example, if I was in a role and I have a job and there's other people who have the same job as me, some of them are higher performers in that role, some of them are lower performers in that role, and I could look at them and say, well, you know, if I tried harder, if I did more different things, then maybe I would be more competitive, I would be more promotable or something like that, right? And I'm speaking from experience. In my particular role as an administrative assistant, I was meeting all of the other people who had the same job as me from various areas in the country, and we were all at this corporate meeting at the beginning of the year. And I was talking to each one and getting a feel for kind of what kind of a person are they. A lot of them are older ladies who've been in that sort of a role for quite a few years, like maybe 30 years or something like that, right? And I remember one of them saying, you know, I work such long hours, and I work, you know, 60 hours, 70 hours a week. I work on the weekend. I'm doing all kinds of stuff all the time. And I remember thinking to myself at that time, you know, on one hand, kind of kudos to you, and, maybe I'm not doing enough. I don't know. Because that's not how my job works at all. Like I don't have, you know, crazy work hours or anything like that. Like, yeah, I'm available after hours and stuff like that, but I'm not like doing all sorts of extra projects and stuff. And what she was describing to me just sounded a lot like busy work. It sounded like she was, I guess, trying to make herself useful. And so she had added all of this extra stuff to her plate that isn't in any way part of her actual job. It's just something that she's, you know, added on. And there's a lot of things like that where these guys would just sort of, you know, have certain emails they would send out, or have certain communications that they would push out to everybody. And, you know, it's not like it was written down anywhere, this is what you're supposed to be doing. It was just what they did. And then it gets to be more and more stuff that's on the list of things that are deemed important to do, even though none of it's actually necessary to do. And so then you have this person who feels like they're important, they're indispensable, they're working long hours, they're forfeiting other things they could be doing with their time. And the reality is it's all in their head, because they're not really doing anything that's all that critical. And so there's all of us, right? All of us in this peer group, and some of us are, you know, working long hours. Some of us are, you know, working in stores doing, you know, some kind of special project. Some of us are sitting in an office. I don't know. It's like everyone's life is different. And if you compared everybody and stacked them all up against each other, maybe you could say, well, some people are higher performers than others or whatever. But fast forward a few months, and you know what the result is? Well, the result is every single one of us was in a role that got sunset, displaced, and eliminated by the company. Why? Because the company decided that that role wasn't necessary anymore. And you could view that as a a negative thing for your ego. You could take it as a slap in the face. You could disagree with the company making that decision. But the bottom line is you don't choose to eliminate a role if that role is critical, right? That's just the bottom line. So now think back, right? Think back to these people that are working extra long hours and they're doing all of this extra stuff and they're saying, oh, I can't, spend time with my family because I have to, answer my phone at some crazy hour of the evening on a weekend or whatever it is, right? Like people are doing all of this stuff thinking that they're indispensable in this role that's so important, and then the company just eliminates the role. Like it doesn't matter, it doesn't make a difference whether I was performing really well or if I was not. It doesn't matter if I was at the top of the tier or the bottom of the tier, because at the end of the day we all got the same memo that that particular role is not necessary anymore, and so it's going to be sunset, right? It's just that simple. So on one hand, there's that conversation of what is false importance, where we attribute importance to something which isn't important and is all in our head. And then we feel like we're obligated to keep that going, but we really aren't doing anything that's particularly vital. It's important to value things appropriately and to know the difference between something you're doing that's just busy work and something that actually is truly value added. Like if you don't do it and something important doesn't happen as a result, then obviously it's an important task. Like in my old job, we would occasionally put people into a hotel and then the hotel would bill us once in a while. Well, that's a good example of a very clear value added activity. If I don't pay the hotel, then the hotel doesn't get their money. And then our people can't stay there and the hotel isn't able to do its business, right? So that's not a huge task, but it's an important task. And no one in the world is going to say, oh, well, I don't know if we really need to do that or not. It's super obvious. But a lot of things are more of a gray area where, yeah, it might be important. Or maybe if you just didn't do it at all, it would actually just make life simpler for everybody, right? But the real heart of what I wanted to talk about today is just this notion that we don't have to worry so much, because life is not necessarily something that we have to figure out, because Providence may well have a plan that's going to work itself out. And I was thinking about this morning because I had passively reached out to a friend of mine, and when I found out that my job was being eliminated, and I was talking about moving to Arkansas and all of that, I thought I should call up my friend Ken, because he's been a good friend, and just touch base with him. He doesn't work for the company anymore, and he's somewhere in New Mexico, and he's just one of those guys. Like I can pick up the phone and talk to him, and we can just talk about anything, everything, whatever. It doesn't matter. We just talk about life, and a few minutes can turn into a few hours sometimes for us if we're not careful, because it's just a lot of bullshit. But I gave him a call. I hadn't talked to him for probably a year or two, and we touched base and caught up, and during the course of that conversation, this other guy comes up in conversation, Tim, and we were talking about him, and we were like, oh yeah, I wonder what happened to Tim. Yeah, he's down there in Arkansas. So because I was just having this random pointless conversation with my friend Ken, we kind of came up with this other guy that we kind of had mutually been friends with and forgotten about, who is in Arkansas and works in transportation down there. And so then because of that conversation, I thought I should give Tim a call and see what he's doing. So I give him a call, and at first I had to even remember, like, what is his last name? I forgot. And I found him in my phone. He's still there. And I give him a call, and he picks up immediately, like he knows who I am. And then we're talking about just, you know, random stuff. And then, you know, he's recommending a particular position that he thinks would be a good fit that's in his building. And he's like, you should apply for this thing. So I'm like, okay. So I'm on my way down to Arkansas, you know, driving the U-Haul truck, pulling the car, all that stuff. And, you know, I get a call from him. He's like, hey, what are you doing? You know, you should apply for this job, and sends me the link to it. And so I apply for it while I'm on the road. And, you know, I didn't really give it too much thought. And then I get into town and get settled in. And, you know, now I've been applying for a lot of jobs, trying to find work with the company. And I don't know, like, you know, like I try to look at the salary of each job to get a feel for, like, is it kind of in the ballpark of what I was making before, because that gives me a fair barometer of what is the complexity and level of the position, right? Because I don't want to apply for something that's so far out of my scope that there's no way in the world I'd be able to learn it. That's not appropriate for anybody. But I do want something that's kind of in the ballpark of the range of pay that I've already been receiving and things like that. So anyways, you know, it's kind of a stab in the dark, but I've been applying for a lot of different roles. And then, you know, as I make this video, it's Monday, and right now I have a pre-screen interview for something. I have that logistics position that my friend Tim had told me I should apply for. Well, I'll be interviewing for that on Friday. And I don't know how any of it will turn out, but I was just thinking to myself, like, what if I get that load manager job? Like, what if that's the job I wind up getting? Because, you know, I know Tim and he recommended me, and, you know, it's something that's probably a new thing, but it's also not too far outside the realm of, you know, something that I could probably learn or whatever, you know. If I got that job, then what would that mean? Well, it would mean that I put a lot of effort into applying for a whole bunch of things, trying to find things, trying to go out of my way to put energy into this stuff. And quite possibly the actual job that I wind up getting, it might be something that's pretty frictionless for me to get into. Like, it's going to be that job that somebody said, hey, why don't you apply for this? You know, it's not going to be the job that, you know, I lost a bunch of sleep over trying to, you know, beg for, or trying to find by perusing hundreds of listings. You know, you never know. But sometimes life does work out in that kind of a way where the things that you want to have happen in your life, the things you need to have happen in your life, they're not the things that are the result of your effort. They're the result of you just following a path of providence. You know, it's like I was talking about moving down to Arkansas for quite some time. And then, you know, here I am. And yes, it involved effort. It's not like the U-Haul truck loaded it up itself. But it was also surprisingly frictionless and providential, in the sense that one day I just get a call saying, you know, your job is eliminated. You're still on payroll. You have 3 months to figure it out. And it just winds up being the perfect timing to get everything figured out, to get everything packed up, to make the move, to, you know, be able to have that experience. And it wasn't this big sacrifice, really. It was a pretty easy thing. It just happened when the time seemed to be right. And so I guess the point I'm getting at is, as we go through life and we contemplate whether we're doing enough, sometimes you just need to have faith, because sometimes it's not about doing enough. Sometimes, just like the job that you've had and then it gets eliminated. Well, would you have kept the job if you did more? Not if the entire job was eliminated, it doesn't matter if you did more or you did less. Like, the end outcome is the same. Sometimes we just put a lot of effort into things because we think that we have to be in control. We have to chart our course. We have to find our way. And we do need to do that. We do need to put effort in, because if you don't put in any effort, then you're not being a good steward of your resources, of your time, of your talent. But sometimes it's not all of the effort which leads us. It's something else. It's that hidden hand that just guides us to where we need to be at the right time and the right place. And if that's the case, then it's cause for hope, because when you worry about things like, am I going to say the right thing in a job interview, or am I going to use the right strategy to put myself on a successful path in life? Whatever it is, maybe you don't have to be perfect, because the path has some provision in it for you already. Like, maybe you can call it God, you can call it the universe, you can call it providence, whatever it is. Maybe there is grace guiding us, and not just our own efforts by themselves that we have to depend on. I was reading an article this morning by someone who was talking about their father, and they said, my dad was very frugal for his whole life, and he worked his way up within one company, and then he lost his job with that company because the plant shut down. And so he relocated to a different city, divorced, to start over with the company. That sounds a little familiar. But anyways, he goes out there and he winds up being frugal kind of his whole life. And that's so that he can retire early. And he's determined to do that. And then he loses his job in his 40s, and he can't find work again, really. And so he eventually just retires, because he realizes that he has enough money, he can probably retire. So he stops working at the age of 50, goes into retirement. But it's such a tight, frugal life, he doesn't really have the option to do very much. So he's continuing to have to live a really frugal life, because he's got to make the money he has last for the rest of his life. And so he's like living like a monk in the monastery, kind of, right? And he's in his 50s, and then he gets a cancer diagnosis, and he dies at 58. And then he realizes there's no way that he would ever be able to spend the money that he had saved his whole life. So he writes a few checks to his kids and tells them to splurge on something fancy for themselves. And, then he dies. And I thought that was an interesting story, because it's so easy to kick the can down the road and have this attitude, well, I'm going to live one day. I'm going to enjoy my life one day. Or to have that attitude, if I could just retire, that would be amazing. But there's more to life than just retiring, Like, I don't know if there's ever a time in life when you want to exactly retire. Like, what are you retiring from? Are you retiring from life? Or are you retiring from doing something that you don't want to do, that you're doing just because you have to do it for the money? Because if you're trying to retire from having to go to work to do a job you hate, then I guess you could retire from that at any time in your life, potentially. Just save enough money so that you're not overwhelmed with debt, and then find a job that you enjoy. By that standard, I'm retired right now, because I have enough money to pay the bills for quite some time. It's not like I would be in financial trouble if I didn't land a job soon. I'm looking for work because obviously I need to work for, you know, I need to work to, you know, get to the point where I'll be able to retire for real and all of that stuff. And I'm not at a point where I could just, you know, not work another day in my life and be fine. But I'm also not at a point where I need to worry about, you know, if I don't bring in money next month, I'm not going to be able to pay the bills or eat or something, right? So being a good steward of your resources to where you're not always scraping the bottom of the barrel, I think that's super important in the territory of financial stewardship. But beyond that, find a job that you value. Find something that you enjoy, something that gives you a sense of connection and an opportunity to serve something greater than yourself. And that's important. It's also important just to enjoy your life. You know, if I enjoy playing computer games and immersing myself in fantasy, then maybe that's what I need to be doing. Like, I'm not saying it's the only thing I need to be doing. I will say one thing I've realized is when you don't have work and you're not going to work or something, that doesn't mean that you wind up getting way more done in terms of your hobbies. Oftentimes you wind up getting about the same amount done just because you don't structure your time in the same way as you would if you were going to work. Like if I was going to work, then I would know, okay, if I want to, you know, make a YouTube video and I want to quest a little bit in Elder Scrolls Online or something, then I'm going to do that this evening after work probably. But if I'm not going to work, then I have that attitude, oh, well, I guess I have all day to do it. I can do it anytime. Well, does that mean I do it all day? No, probably not. So there's time for us to have hobbies in our life. And it's important to have hobbies, because if you're saying, well, I'm going to wait until I'm retired one day to do that, well, that's kind of a foolish way to look at life. Because what happens if you die before you ever get to that point, you know? Or if you live your life saying, you know, I want to get to the point where I don't have to work. And then you get to a point where you can retire, but you're just living like a monk in a monastery, and you can't go out to eat and you can't do anything. And you know, you're just super frugal all the time. You know, are you really living the quality of life that, you know, that you want? So sometimes we get hung up on these things that are a poster child of what we think good looks like retiring early or extreme frugality or whatever it is. And the bottom line is it's not about any one of those things. It's just about following your heart. It's about doing things today that add value into your life, doing things right now that make you feel a sense of connection and joy, because none of us are assured the future. None of us are guaranteed any particular thing. We could all realize that our time of expiration is closer than we think. Like I plan to, you know, try to live to be 100 years old, something like that, right? But the reality is I'm not guaranteed that. I have no assurance that that's how it's going to pan out. There's people who perish on any given day in their youth, and they don't usually get up in the morning and say, oh, I think that today is the day that I'm going to be passing away. You know, but then you read about them in the newspaper because there was some kind of a horrific accident or something that happened, right? None of us want that to happen, but none of us know what's really going to happen exactly. Maybe we can kind of see through a glass darkly to have a sense of what we should be doing or what we shouldn't be doing, and we should always follow our heart, because sometimes those gut feelings can wind up being really providential. And I think that sometimes if you follow your heart and you do what you feel like you need to do, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense, that can wind up being a lifesaver, maybe in a literal way sometimes. I think about wanting to, you know, make this move out to Arkansas, and then I think about my job being eliminated right around the same time. you know? And I think, what if I didn't, want to do that? What if I didn't think about it and make the provision and put all that effort in on the front side? Like when I found out my job was eliminated, I already had the apartment on hold down in Arkansas. I had it on hold for months. So, is that maybe providence kind of positioning me so that when the time comes and I have to make that change, it's not hard for me to make that change because it's a change that's already been on my heart to make. And that goes back full circle to that whole notion that we don't have to be in control of everything, because sometimes life will take care of providing a way when we need it to, and we don't have to be the masters of our destiny, because destiny has a plan for us. We just have to listen to that still small voice that is telling us maybe whether we should turn right or turn left. And when the door presents itself and opens to us, then what we need to do is be willing to open the door, be willing to go through the doorway when it presents itself, when that opportunity comes and says, hey, you can go do this thing. Then you need to be ready to go. And that's where I think a lot about things like the Bible story of the guys sitting there when Jesus comes. He finds the fisherman that's got nothing to do, that's just sitting there fishing by the water with his bed mat there, and Jesus says, follow me, and I have a path, you're going to follow me. And the fisherman just gets up and rolls up his bed mat and puts it on his back and follows Jesus. And I think it's important for us to have that attitude, that we're kind of nomads in this world, that we're willing to go when the call comes. Because if you have to say, oh, well, let me, sell my house and let me figure out all of this other stuff, and then I can go. Well, the call is going to come and you're going to miss that call because you're busy trying to handle all of these material things, all of the, all of the stuff that you spent your time figuring out because you thought you needed those things. They can wind up being the weight around your neck. But if you just trust providence and you travel this world light and you don't really hang on to things too much, and you just kind of say, I guess I'm going to get up every day and see, what do I feel like, the Spirit is calling on me to do right now, and then be willing to heed that call, then sometimes your life just winds up kind of being like a river that finds its own way, and you don't have to figure out every single thing. You can just have faith that even if you aren't super sure how all the pieces are gonna fit together, they will, and you'll understand by and by. As always, good luck on your adventure. Till next time, thanks so much.